I didn't want to feel judged for being shallow. I didn't want to feel judged for being culturally insensitive. I didn't want to feel judged for being weak, quite honestly, since I come from this sort of position of strength and keep working harder. So you're right. I really had a mask on.
You're listening to the Tracey Coates Show, the show that answers questions of the heart while providing practical tips and advice for navigating the legal side of relationships too. I'm your host, Tracey Coates, mother, wife, attorney, and certified life coach. Along with my guests, I delve into all things relationships, not just what to do when divorce is on the horizon, but the practical tips, advice, and information you'll need to possibly save your marriage, rekindle that spark, and put your relationship back on track. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another wonderful episode of the Tracey Coates Show. We have a wonderful guest with us today. Her name is Margaret Davis Ghielmetti, and Margaret is here to tell us about her phenomenal book, Bravish, a memoir of a recovering perfectionist, which I know will touch and resonate with so many of you. So there's so many great points and themes throughout this book. So without further ado, Margaret, welcome to the Tracey Coates Show.
Wow, Tracey, I can't tell you how delighted I am to be here and how honored. I really love what you're bringing to the world. It's a gift, how you're serving people, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. So thanks for having me on.
Oh, it is a pleasure to have you on. So, Margaret, can you tell us before we dive into the book, which is phenomenal, and we will certainly link ways in which everyone can get a copy of it in the show notes and at the end, but can you tell us a little bit just about you, Margaret, the person, the author, the wife, the daughter?
Okay. Wow. Thank you. Well, I appreciate that question. I am all those things. But in terms of my creative journey, I think what's probably interesting to folks to know is I lived on 4 continents and visited about 50 countries. And so this book, and thank you very much for your kind words, it really started out as I thought it was going to be a collection of travelers' tales because I do a lot of live lit storytelling. I'm a solo show artist. I do a lot of improv, and people love to hear about travel misadventures. And so I thought, I'm going to put together another solo show with my travelers' misadventures. And as I started to put that together, first of all, I started to push back politically against what I felt we were being told that the other is bad, because that's not my experience living around the world. But it also became clear to me that it was the narrator, me, the narrator's journey from being someone who gave up her career at 40 years old to follow her husband's career around the world. And I wouldn't trade that, but it was a real crisis of identity. So the book starts with my crisis of identity, giving up my professional identity to follow someone else's, and traces my regaining my own identity and then coming into my own re-engagement with my creative expression. The reason I ended up writing it was to try to give others inspiration that it's never too late to live our own lives, but we do have to be willing to look at some of the rules and roles we thought kept us safe for a long time. And sometimes maybe they did keep us safe, and then some of them I've needed to let go in order to embrace other things. So yeah, I love to do storytelling. I've got that coming up live again soon for the first time in a couple of years. I'm excited about that. Yeah, it's fun. I'm getting back into improv. I'm taking courses on publishing the personal in literary magazines. So I'm always excited to learn new things. And on a personal level, I'm married to a wonderful Swiss man, and we kind of divide our time between Switzerland and Chicago.
She's all over the place, folks. That just sounds heavenly. Divide our time between Switzerland and Chicago.
It's not bad.
So I want to start with the book. And one of the things I would love to start with is a review that Adrienne Weiss, who's also an author of Brand Buzz, 3 Breakthrough Secrets for Building a Winning Brand. This is what she writes about your book. To use Ghielmetti's own words, reading her memoir is like an otter easing into a river. It's easy to cry and laugh with her on her journey through both exotic places in the world and intimate places in the heart. At the same time, I was permitted to walk through the door of her complex family and marriage and witness firsthand the behind-the-door feelings of both. Rarely is a reader given such profound access to the humble humanity of another person. That just really struck with me when I was reading through these and obviously through the book, because as I mentioned to you, there is certainly a vulnerability to this book that I think not everyone would be willing to share, particularly knowing that it's a memoir about their lives and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts when you first read her review? And is this the theme, the feeling that you wanted people to take from your book?
Yeah, I was delighted with that because one thing the storytelling really helped me to see was, as I say, I started out by telling stories about travel, which is fun. And people were laughing. And I'm someone who's a very social introvert. So I really didn't think I wanted to be on stage at all. And people were laughing, and that was great. But when I started to tell things that were closer to the heart, my husband's and my struggle with infertility, my parents at the end of their lives, that's when I could feel energetically. I always say on a molecular level, I could feel the audience leaning in because we all want to share our common humanity. And so it allowed me to get more and more vulnerable because that's what I do art for, is to make connection with people. And if I'm not vulnerable, if I'm just sharing something to be funny or witty or whatever, I'm not making a connection. So the vulnerability is really important to me. And the book really spoke to me that I needed to write a memoir. I wasn't expecting to write a memoir, and it just came out of me that I needed and wanted to share this. I have had a couple people say to me after my solo show, "Gee, I could never do that." And I've said to them, I know that about you. So some people, I understand for some people, they don't choose to be maybe as vulnerable as I was in my solo show, in my book, in my storytelling. And that's okay. But I do believe if we're not honest with our audiences and honest with the people we love, and with strangers to a large extent, we're cheating everyone. I mean, people aren't, I'm too, honestly, I'm too old to be hiding who I really am. And I don't think it serves anyone. And I want people to know that they're not alone. They're not alone in their experience. And if I had known that at the beginning of the book, my life might have gone differently. I really had to learn that I'm not alone, and that people want to help.
I think in terms of the vulnerability, particularly for women, I think it takes on two sort of thoughts. Number one, there's so much around vulnerability that I think sometimes it becomes overused, and people use the word vulnerability in an inauthentic way to make that connection, which may or may not be there. You do it so smoothly and so genuinely and authentically that you can just tell that you're just sharing your experiences without really expecting something in return.
Mm.
When I was reading the book, it was just so, it flowed for me very, very smoothly. And then I think the other thought is that it is very difficult for women, particularly professional women, that to be vulnerable means to let down a guard, to let down their shields and armor and let people see them. Because in order to move through corporate America, to move through life, to move through certain social circles, you have to have an appearance, an outward hardness, if you will, in order to be successful. So that is one of the reasons why I loved the fact that you shared in such a human, very vulnerable way.
Amen to what you said. I do think that the creative process and, let's say, storytelling allows people to step outside their professional persona. But I do understand not everyone wants to expose perhaps all the things I was willing to talk about. And while I had given up my professional career at that point, my husband was working for a Four Seasons hotel. So I also was conscious that I didn't ever want to do anything that made him uncomfortable. So I had that sort of a protecting the family, protecting that sort of thing. So I really hear what you're saying, but I do think there's a point at which, to me, it really occurred to me, either I show up more as my genuine self, I felt I was at risk of losing, this is going to sound really over the top, but sort of losing my mortal soul. There was a point at which it was time. It was time. I was absolutely at that razor's edge where I think we all know we can be in sort of stasis and this is what I'm comfortable doing. And then it can become so uncomfortable that it tips us over and we're willing to take the risk to be what we want next. And that's the point I got to. So that's, of course, the beauty of getting a little bit older in life is it starts to become a lot more clear. Became really important to me to be me as opposed to all of the other things that I thought. I mean, I know from your podcast, worrying about how others feel about us, the whole notion of what is success, what is failure, someone else's dream. These are all things that you mentioned versus, as you say, being intentional. And it really, something tipped for me where it's like, it's time to be me.
Good for you. And so, one of the first things that I want to dive into is this idea of the Davis Family Handbook, which I love that just generally because I think that so many of us have a handbook, have a manual for others that either they have never seen, they didn't even know existed, but we expect them and are just completely dumbfounded when they don't follow the rules. And
Right.
so, talk to us about this Davis Family Handbook that runs throughout the book.
I'd like to stress it's not a literal handbook, it's a metaphorical handbook because some people have asked me, wow, do you still have a copy of the handbook? And it's the rules that I think each of us get these rules at birth, and our parents got these rules at birth. And I agree with you. For a long time, I thought everyone got exactly the same handbook I did. So I was baffled when they didn't act exactly the way I thought they should, according to the Davis Family Handbook. Once I realized that, it helped me to see my own handbook and to realize, wow, the rules that my parents gave me are all really good, basic societal rules until they're in excess. And so the rules that I think any of us can agree with, and I'm just looking for myself to see if you want it done right, do it yourself. Okay, that's great in many ways until you take it too far, like I did, which is never, ever asking for help. It always put others first. It's lovely to put others first. I love to put others first, but always, all of a sudden, my life is diminished. Don't air your dirty laundry in public. Okay, I don't want to be complaining about my stuff all the time, but people care. And I talk about my mom having Just Do It well before Nike got a hold of it, because honestly, in our house, it had to be constant motion, constant productivity. Chores were a form of almost like if you got to participate in the chores, you had done something right. So it was all these things that came to realize are in excess.
I love that part in the book when you do talk about that, which I think I kind of chuckled a little bit because talk about the fact that if you weren't participating in the chores with your brothers, you were sort of upset because now you're on the outside, you're not in with the fun and games in the kitchen or wherever the chores were. Talk about that. I kind of got a kick out of that.
Okay. I know it sounds completely absurd, but that was work, and productivity was such a central value in our home that, and actually it was fun because I have 3 older brothers. So we'd be whipping the towels in the kitchen and whatnot. And it was a lot of fun, but really one of the punishments if I did something wrong, which I rarely did as a perfectionist, but was to not get to participate in some chores. And I know it sounds really like I should be sitting on the psychologist's couch right now. And I love therapists, big hugs and kisses to therapists everywhere. But that was one of the rules, that the best way to still be part of the family was to work hard and do it right and not complain. And, that was a way really, I think, of showing love, was doing everything perfectly. Those are just some of the rules in my handbook. I have shared this notion with many, many people, obviously. And I do have one friend who crushingly said to me, there was one rule in her family handbook, and that was silence. And I thought my heart would break. And I know her history, and there's a lot of trauma. And my hope is that it helps all of us look at our family handbooks and see where we'd like to revise them, tear out some pages, take a red pen, white out, and then keep the stuff that serves us now. I have another friend who said to me, "Oh, easy for you. Your parents loved you. I didn't get a handbook." And I said, "Well, with no disrespect, I think that's the handbook you've been carrying your whole life, is you didn't get a handbook from your parents, whereas I did, or whatnot." And I'm just looking to see if it can offer us some clarity about, for myself, what drives me. What are the patterns, the rules, the roles that drive me, and keep the good part. And then by the end of the book, as you know, I revise the handbook. But thanks for bringing it up, because it really, it helps me a lot in conversation with folks, because I'm thinking, oh gosh, maybe that's a rule or a role that any of us might want to reassess.
Absolutely. And I do agree with you. I think we all have handbooks. I think we all have these handbooks that we were given that have carried through us. And I think sometimes even without thinking, hopefully people are revising them to sort of fit their new self, their new vision of who they want themselves to be, who they want their family to be, while keeping, like you said, the good parts, and thinking, okay, I didn't necessarily agree or thrive with this part of the handbook, so let's figure out a way to tweak it so that we can move forward. So I love that. I think you're absolutely correct. So one of the things that I would love to do, Margaret, is to go through really three essential themes that I took from the book that I think my listeners really, really will resonate with. And the first theme being the people pleasing aspect. Right. And I think there's so many of us, myself included, have this notion of having to please everybody, having to make sure that everybody else around us is taken care of at the risk of us suffering. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, I do know a lot of men who suffer from this, but I think societally, women are that's the water that we're often raised to swim in. And as you say, it's so pervasive. I love to please other people, but I do know, as you're saying, people pleasing is a very different thing, because it for me, absolutely, when I felt the void when we moved overseas following my husband's career, and I felt like I didn't have a professional identity, I extrapolated that out into I didn't have an identity at all. And so what I did was I took the handbook and I started to fill that void with all of the roles from these rules. And that was the people pleasing. So I'm like, okay, I will know I exist and that I'm lovable and loved if I'm the perfect corporate spouse. I'm the perfect expatriate. I'm perfectly culturally sensitive in every place we've been dropped down into. I'm the perfect daughter from 7,000 miles away. I'm the perfect friend. As long as I made everyone else okay, I felt like I existed. I know that sounds maybe overwrought to some people, but I really do think it's almost existential for a lot of us, that's what we have to do, as you say, all the time for everyone, versus saying,
Right.
oh yeah, I really love to make people happy. I really do. But that's a very different feeling than I have to make sure everyone else is okay, and certainly before me. So people would say, well, what do you want? It's like, oh, I cannot even get to that. I didn't even know what people were talking about at the time. It's like, why are you
Right.
asking me that? Inappropriate. So I do think a lot of women suffer from that. I think we're raised to do that in many, many ways. So I think it's a struggle for a lot of folks. And I do love to see people, as we get older, I mean, I wish this for young people too, start to recognize, wow, there's really a price that's being paid for making sure everyone else is fine before I even think about me.
Exactly. There's a part in the book, and correct me if I'm retelling this incorrectly, but you put on a sort of a gathering of all these different women from all the different Four Seasons resorts, and they all come, and one of the lines I think that you said your husband said, I'm hoping that you'll make a friend from it, or you're hoping to make these connections. And at the end of this, what's read like an amazing, wonderful connection, social connection of all these wonderful women, you said you heard from no one. Like there
Mm.
was no connection afterwards. And I just I felt for you after that, because it was one of those things that you're like, you want to be liked, you want to have a connection, you're overseas, as you just said, an expat. And it's like, you tried, but there was no connection there for some, or at least they didn't reciprocate.
Right. And that was very painful. And yes, I thought, to back to your point, that I thought everyone else's handbook was that if I did this, then they would be so delighted, that I kind of knew the best way to make all of these other people happy. That if I could
Mhm.
just get everyone on board with this idea of, we can have a community here. And I was like, let's make a yellow pages. This is a long time ago where you'd even think to do
Yes,
that.
I just see the yellow pages, right?
Like a listing of there was only one grocery store and this sort of thing. So I really, looking back, it was people pleasing, but from a point of view of feeling not that I knew better, but that I was so desperate to make sure everyone else was okay. I was a little bit not hearing that that wasn't necessarily what would be working for someone else. And it certainly wasn't working for me, because it's true. It wasn't, people didn't want to follow up on it. They weren't me. They had their own
Right.
needs. So it was, yeah, there were several moments like that, particularly setting up a life in a different country, reaching out, trying to make sure even the people I just met, that they were all okay, as opposed to ever saying, what I'd really like is just one person to go have a coffee with and be myself.
Which sort of brings me to the second theme that I resonated throughout the book, and that is asking for help. I think so many of us, men and women, but particularly women, don't want to ask for help for whatever reason. For they just, they don't feel they need it, or it makes them look weak, or they're supposed to be able to do this. But you got to a point where you asked for help, and talk to the audience about where you sought that help from in the
Mm,
book, in terms of the higher power that you decided to call upon in order to, hey, and I think it started with drinking, but and then going forward.
mm. Yeah, if I could do the letter to my younger self, people often ask that question, what would I put in a letter to my younger self? It would be ask for help and accept help. Because again, given the handbook that I grew up with, as you're citing, that was not acceptable. Absolutely not acceptable. It was do it yourself. And for me, the most comfortable come from for me is if I can do it myself yesterday perfectly without any help. So that I still suffer from that. I still am a recovering perfectionist. I still find myself like, I want it done yesterday perfectly without any help. So in my case, yes, it was, I really thought that I had it in terms of this expatriate lifestyle, having traveled a lot and knowing languages. I thought, oh, I've totally got this. I did not have it. I was not prepared for how lonely I was, how angry I was. Those are actually emotions I really wasn't even in touch with at the time. But I didn't ask anyone for help. I told everyone I'm fine, because I felt, I'm living in Four Seasons hotels, for Pete's sake, in all these places around the world. My friends were schlepping to the grocery store in a minivan with their kids in tow. I was like, I am not going to lay on them that, oh gosh, Margaret's lonely in Cairo. And all my friends now say, I wish you had said, wow, Margaret is lonely in Cairo. We would have loved to have helped you. I did not know that at the time. I really, as all the reasons that you cited, I thought I could not ask for help.
But you did have friends and family come over and visit. Like you had a consistent stream of contact with friends that you spent time with while you were overseas, but it almost, in terms of what you're describing in the struggles in the book, is that it really was a mask. It was, you didn't let people in. You only let them in to a certain degree, right? To sort of be the perfect hostess, to be the perfect tour guide, and then sort of shut down. So people didn't actually know that you weren't living this amazing, amazing life with respect to some aspects of your life. On the other hand, you were in the Four Seasons, right? All over the world. So that is wonderful. But I think there's a certain aspect that you really shut people out, even those closest to you.
Completely true. I wanted them to have the perfect experience visiting me in Paris, visiting me, all the places that we've lived. I wanted it to be perfect for them. I still want that to be perfect for people, but I swear people now, show up. If I'm feeling lonely, I'm going to say, wow, I'm so glad you're here. I'm going to make it perfect for you. And we're going to have a cup of coffee and I'm going to tell you that I'm whatever I am. So it's true. At the time, it was the mask I felt I really needed to wear. I was protecting myself from, I didn't want to feel judged for being shallow. I didn't want to feel judged for being culturally insensitive. I didn't want to feel judged for being weak, quite honestly, since I come from this sort of position of strength and keep working harder. So you're right. I really had a mask on. And as I say, friends now reading the book, I've had several of my dearest friends say, if we'd only known. And I say, I take full responsibility, because if I'd only shared with you, it was never them. Anyone would have been happy to help me. I just couldn't let people in. So when you talk about the drinking, that's just true for a lot of folks. We all sometimes, well, I'll just speak for myself. I certainly was using at the time alcohol to make those what felt like dangerous feelings go away. The feeling of lonely. Oh no, I can't be lonely. I can't be weak. And so the drinking definitely got worse, to the point where I really had a moment where it tipped over into realizing, wait a minute, I am trying to fill a void, an internal void, with an external solution. And I have tried that with food, and I was using alcohol, and it was actually not an alcohol related moment that allowed me to stop drinking. It was getting on a website late at night after having a lot to drink and ordering too many pairs of earrings. And I still have those earrings. But the next morning, I realized, wait a minute, now I'm trying to fill up this void with shopping. Something clicked in me. And that, as you say, I did at that moment, I reached out to what I can call God or a higher power. It doesn't matter, to say, help me. And I did get help. So I continued to get help every time I asked from the spiritual connection. And that I prayed for help also from what I call God. Please help me to learn to also ask for help and accept help from humans, because that felt more dangerous to me. It felt so unfamiliar to me. I mean, I prayed for the help to not respond, I'm fine, when people ask me. Mm-hmm. And I have really taught my husband, if I ever, and any person I know ever says, I'm fine, never believe them. That's just, that's the social construct that we're supposed to say, I'm fine. And then the conversation moves on. So I did ask for help from what I call God. I got help from what I call God. I still do whenever I ask and all the time. But I also really learned to ask for help from humans and to accept that I'm not superhuman. I'm not God. I need help like every human does. So that's been probably the biggest blessing of this journey, is knowing, oh, I'm not supposed to be anything other than a human.
Right. And I think both the beauty and the pain in asking for help is that everybody has a different and unique way of doing things that is going to be different from us. And so, it may not get done the way that you would have done it yesterday perfectly. Right. But the beauty of that is maybe this is a new, wonderful, perfect way to do it this way. And I
Right.
think sometimes that's difficult for us to sort of embrace. But again, that is something, and it doesn't have to necessarily be from a higher power, as you just already articulated. It can be from a human, another person, another mom, coworker, whomever. But if people don't know what's going on inside, they're not going to be able to help you because they're going to be clueless to sort of the struggles that you are going through. So I certainly underscore ask for help in big or small with the things that you're struggling with.
I love that big or small too, because I think that's another thing is for a lot of us, we wait until it gets to be really outsized. It's okay to ask for help on something small. The other thing I really learned is sure, I would love everyone to read my mind, but they can't. And I mean, it's a joke with Patrick, my husband, and me. Sometimes I will say to him, I need you to support me in this way. And I'm going to tell you exactly the words I need to hear. And I have one friend who's like, isn't that irritating to tell him what to say? I'm like, yes, it is. I do. I wish he could read my mind, but I don't want him to fall into a trap. I'm asking him for help. I want him to be successful in giving me the help I need. And I mean, he's a wonderful, perceptive person, but sometimes it's like, this is exactly the help that I need. So I've also gotten less shy about, yes, respecting that other people may do it their way, but also if I really, really need something specific, I can ask for help. And I can also say, and the specific help I need, if you're able to give it, is this, because they're not reading my mind either. They may be thinking, oh gosh, I bet what Margaret really needs is a cup of tea. And I'm like, no, what Margaret really needs is, I don't know, go to a movie together. It doesn't matter.
Right. Or to be left alone.
Or yeah, key.
Exactly.
Right. Right.
Absolutely. I have those days.
Right.
And so as we sort of transition and journey through the book, Margaret, one of the last things that really struck me that was very evident is that you absolutely came to a point that you were like, enough is enough. This is what I need. When and talk to us a little bit about when you started to say no to others, started to sort of set boundaries so that you can in turn start to say yes to the things that were important to you, specifically based on what you were just saying, what your needs were, not having people having to guess it, not feeling bad about this is what I want versus what I don't want. Talk to us about part of the journey in the book.
That is a real turning point for me in the book. And I love looking at people's lives because the turning points are so often not as big as we think they're going to be. For me, one of the biggest ones was when we lived in Chiang Mai in northern Thailand. And my husband was taking over from a previous general manager, and I was taking over the residence where we'd be living from that person's spouse. Lovely person, very different from me, really an extrovert. And she was telling me, you will be doing cocktail parties every night for the guests in your home. As an introvert, I'm feeling it all over again. I'm feeling it all over again. And some little introvert voice, this little flame, I said no. And I know it seems like such a small thing to someone else, but for me, to give up the rewards, the emotional rewards of people pleasing, which is always, if I'm the perfect corporate spouse in this setting, people will love me for it. I mean, I recognize there's a reward for every time I people please. I thought I cannot do. I cannot do that. I need a lot of time to be quiet and peaceful.
And to not feel bad about it, though, too, right? I mean, there was a point earlier in the book, and I remember, and a friend or an acquaintance wanted to come visit you. You were on your way out of Paris and you told her no, and she hung up on you. But I think that guilt was like, oh no, I just made her upset. And we all know, we are not responsible for other people's feelings. But at the same time, it's like, oh, that dagger in your heart, I felt like you felt at that time versus later on, you started, I mean, you may have felt, bad because you're a recovering perfectionist and people pleaser, but I didn't get the same sense as it was earlier on.
You're so right. You're so right. And it was funny when I was workshopping this book in my memoir in a year class, there was one person in the class who said, I cannot believe you did not want to make that woman's dream come true. That was a really helpful moment because it occurred to me, wow, I think I need to in the book show what a struggle this was for me. It was not that I didn't want to make her dream come true. It took every fiber in my being to say no. It still takes a lot of fibers in my being to say no. But as you say, at the time, it was like a dagger in my heart that was not making someone else's life perfect. And I just felt it was wrong. So you're right. By the time I get to this moment where I say to this woman, no, I was just starting to flex that tiny, tiny little muscle, that tiny little saying no muscle. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's like a little mouse saying, oh. And I kept, flexing that muscle. I think I also had other people's expectations wrong. I thought people
Mm.
expected me to do a lot of things that they did not expect of me. I had built up this whole, I know the perfect way to people please everyone. And people were like, I don't even need that from you. Primarily my husband, who's a great guy who never said, I need you to do this. And so I started to assess things. Do I add value? I mean, is it important for him because I love him? Is it important to someone else because I love them? Is it important to me? Do I add value? Is this, making choices? I'm a big, big believer in making choices. And for a long time, I didn't feel I was making choices. I felt like things were inevitable. And now I, with all my heart, believe that literally every single thing I do and how I am every day is a choice. I believe that profoundly, but I had to learn that. I had to learn that, oh, I get to make a choice around this. And yeah, sometimes there's a price to pay. Sometimes people aren't happy when I say no, but I have learned, okay, I'm making a choice and I'm willing to sacrifice the emotional payoff for something that's more important to me. But that was a journey. The little mouse flexing its muscles, little mouse barbells, like, woo, doing my workout.
Exactly. I love that image. One of the things that before we wrap up, Margaret, that I just want to ask you, speaking of Patrick, your husband, tell me how Patrick, what did he think of the book? Share sort of when he read it and saw his life over these years and being narrated about his feelings, his actions. What were his thoughts?
Well, I was very careful to make sure that I read the whole book to him before it went to the publisher because I didn't want
Smart
his,
woman.
I didn't need his approval, but I wanted to make sure he felt it was fair. And Patrick likes to joke now. He's like, Patrick, the husband, doesn't look great in the first half of the book. It gets better. And the reason it gets better is because I certainly learned to express myself. So I think in any relationship, I want to take responsibility for my part. So if I wasn't expressing myself, how could he possibly be supportive of me? So there were a lot of things where, again, I'm still growing. I'm still learning in all the relationships I have. But the more I say what's important to me, the more I'm honest and genuine with myself in my relationship with other people. That's definitely worked in my relationship with Patrick. So he does recognize too, looking back, he was driven at the beginning of this journey. He was not very intentional. I use the sort of this phase of being unconsciously incompetent, which is where I start out in the book, to becoming consciously incompetent and now trying to grow more into consciously being more competent. And Patrick recognizes that about himself too, that as a new general manager, he wasn't really seeing a lot of room to do things other than work 24/7. That's just what he did. And he has a similar family handbook from mine. So you can imagine. And he's grown. We've had to grow. So there were a couple things where he kind of gave me a wry smile, but I just said, if it's not fair, I will change it. If it's not what you recall, I will change it. Otherwise, I want to be sharing the journey of a relationship with another human being. That person happens to be Patrick. So he's like, I won't say the word on your podcast. I'm an X in the first half of the book, and then it gets better. So I do tell people, keep reading. Patrick gets better.
Keep reading. Exactly. And it's a wonderful read. It
Thank
is
you.
a fantastic book. Everybody should go out and buy it. Margaret, I am so grateful that you joined the podcast today. Thank you for sharing your journey, your vulnerability. Please share with everyone how they can get a copy of the book.
Oh, gosh. Well, the book is available through any independent bookstore can order it for people if they're indie bookstore fans. And then there's Amazon. People can grab it right away. There's Barnes & Noble. Any bookstore in the world can order it, or you can just one click and get it on Amazon. So it's easily available. And I'm quite sincere when I say I would really welcome anyone who's interested in telling his or her story to feel free to get in touch with me. If I can be helpful, that's really important to me, that people get their stories told. My email address is my first name, Margaret at margaretghielmetti.com. So I really do welcome people to reach out. It's really important to me. And Tracey, I'm so grateful that you are willing to share this conversation and share, as you say, this new vision with your amazing audience.
Margaret Davis Ghielmetti, thank you so much. And thank you for being here. And of course, we absolutely will put all of the links in our show notes so people can easily communicate with you and to purchase the book.
Thanks, Tracey.
What a wonderful episode. I absolutely loved my conversation with Margaret today. Her book, Bravish, a memoir of a recovering perfectionist, was absolutely a fantastic read. And so I encourage all of you to go out and to purchase it and to really sit through it. And as you're going through it, really think about how her journeys, her struggles are applicable to some of the aspects of your life, whether it's the people pleasing, whether it's learning to not only just ask for help, but also to accept it when it's given. And of course, learning to set boundaries in which sometimes you may have to tell other people no, but what you're really doing is saying yes to the things that you need, that you care about in order to live your highest self. So thank you again, Margaret. And for more episodes, please head over to my website at www.tcoates.com. Follow me on social media. I am on Instagram at I am Tracey Coates. And of course, for those of you who are also interested in learning more about how to work with me in a different way, find out about my coaching services, head over to www.coachingwithtraceycoates.com and follow me on social media at coachingwithtraceycoates.com. And again, as always, thank you to everyone who has left a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps the podcast become more discoverable and reach more people that will benefit from the information shared here. Until next time.